Welcome back to Inside City Hall. President Obama is moving forward with an executive order that, when implemented, will prevent millions of undocumented immigrants from being deported. But some key congressional lawmakers are vowing swift action to halt the measure, as you have heard. Joining me now to talk about how this issue will affect New York's immigrant community, we've got Marika Dias, the managing attorney for Make the Road New York. Charles Cooper is chairman of the African Advisory Council of the Bronx, and Steven Choi is the executive director of the New York Immigration Coalition. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
And in general, I assume that this is a good day. This is something that gives you at least part of what you've been calling for a while now, right?
Absolutely. You know, immigration reform has always been a bedrock of the African community. I remember as far back as when my family and I, when we fled Liberia during the civil unrest and we came here. To march on D.C. To get some type of immigration change from the temporary protective status. So this is good. What it does is it gives folks hope that this is a good starting point, but we're not going to end here. You know, I got a phone call from one of my constituents in the community a couple of days ago, and one of the questions was, well, how is this going to benefit me? Now, this is a mother with 2 kids. Her papers are now all together, and she was wondering, well, can I apply for housing now? You know, can I actually apply for this job? So this is impacting the community, and it's one of those things that folks are hopeful.
And the answer to that question, and questions of that type, is almost always going to be maybe, right?
Yes.
So I can turn to one of the 2 attorneys, because I know that's the standard response, right?
Yeah,
I mean, let's talk a little bit about what the bill does and doesn't do, right? So the bill will allow who? They say 4 to 5 million. We don't know by name exactly who, but what are the categories of people that will now find some relief?
Sure. So some of the categories that we're talking about are immigrants who've been here for at least 5 years, who have children who are US citizens or lawful permanent residents. That's one category of people. Another category of people are people who arrived as children, but who perhaps did not qualify under the existing program for deferred action for childhood arrivals. So there are 2 key categories of people that will benefit predominantly, and that group alone, those 2 groups alone, amount to potentially upwards of 4 million.
And what I would say, Errol, is that we should make no mistake. This is a historic step. This is a major opportunity. And it's because there's been such inaction on this. We have not had congressional legislation on immigration reform for the past 30 years. So the fact that the president is going to say, I'm going to extend some kind of relief for 4 to 5 million immigrants and 250,000 in New Yorkers we anticipate will benefit, that's significant. But let's also make no mistake that this is just a Band-Aid on a wound that's been festering for 30 years.
Well, but let's. So I want to emphasize that now. You're saying that in New York State there'll be 250,000 people who will be eligible for the kind of relief that the president is expected to announce tonight. The details, of course, are going to get ironed out, and there's going to probably be a legal challenge and a political fight over it as well, right?
That's right. And when you look at the total undocumented population of New York, you're really talking about 870,000 people. That's the latest research. And I think the thing that's important about New York is we have such a diverse immigrant community. About 55% of the undocumented population is Latino. And yet you have 200,000 undocumented Asian New Yorkers. You have 100,000 from the Caribbean. You have 60,000 from Europe. You have 40,000 from Africa. So we really need to be thinking about how are we going to respond in a very diverse way that's going to be able to capture all of New York's incredibly diverse communities.
I always get freaked out when you talk about the numbers. They're always much higher than I expect, because I know that this is an issue and I read all of your stuff, but those are really big numbers. Let's talk about what this is not going to cover. I mean, the president is talking about something that will allow people to stay, at least temporarily, but it doesn't make them eligible for food stamps. It doesn't let them apply for and get Medicaid, very important. It doesn't let them get Obamacare. In your communities, I know there's a part of all of your organizations that's not advocacy but direct service. What's that going to mean for people who have a health problem or other kind of problems?
You know, it's unfortunate because just several weeks ago, one of the main issues we're focused on is health. And we had an individual from the community, Senegalese community, and came to the meeting, and he was discussing that, he needs to be on dialysis. He was having major kidney issues, and he went to the emergency room, but they can only do so much. So this is, like you said before, this is a Band-Aid. We need a greater change with respect to the reform, and we hope this is the first step, but this is not going to end here because there's folks in the African community, and if you want to have a thriving population, healthcare, education, are some of the components that's needed. You cannot neglect those components.
Let me also clear up something at the national level.
Sure.
Speaking to one of our other attorneys who's here, does the president have the authority to do this? I mean, I think most of the headlines tomorrow are going to focus on that. It looks like there's going to be a clash with Congress and possibly a number of lawsuits. As you know, it's very easy to get into court, not so easy to stay there. Is the president on solid legal ground in making what we expect to hear him announce?
I think it's absolutely positively true that the president has legal authority. And I'm paraphrasing here, but you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And the facts are that every single president for the past half century has issued executive action on immigration. There have been nearly 40 executive actions on immigration. And so to say that the president doesn't have the power, just last week I had lunch with a Cuban friend, and his family fled from Cuba because of political persecution. And you know what? They happened to take advantage because President Eisenhower issued an executive order covering 600,000 Cubans. I don't think they were calling him Imperial Ike. And so the idea that somehow President Obama does not have the legal authority, this may not be politically palatable, but it is legally and totally on strong legal ground.
And the underlying legal theory is that the executive has prosecutorial discretion.
Absolutely.
There are an estimated 11 to 13 million undocumented people here. He has a budget that would cover at most maybe 400,000 for removal in any given year, so he's got to decide.
He must decide, and he cannot also act in a way that sort of takes over the sphere of Congress. But the fact is that the size of the problem is so huge. And the Senate immigration reform bill that passed the Senate in 2013 would have covered 9 million people. So this is really a temporary solution that's covering only a fraction of those folks who are really affected by this.
Okay, so now let's come back to New York. We're going to hear an announcement today. Will there need to be changes in city or state procedures in order to enact this? Or will life just go on and they just have less to fear from federal deportation agents?
I mean, I think, I don't know that life will just go on as it did, and hopefully it won't just go on as it did, because this is really going to have a tremendous impact on hundreds of thousands of folks in our city. At a level of city legislation, at the level of state legislation, there are not necessarily changes that need to be made as a result of this particular executive action. However, we are certainly always advocating for changes that will further assist immigrant communities. And one in particular that comes to mind is in-state tuition assistance for childhood arrivals. So even as we see at the moment, we have a deferred action for childhood arrivals program that is now poised to be expanded. However, those young people who want to enter into college are not necessarily eligible for in-state tuition assistance. And so that is something that the state could do to further solidify, the benefits of a program like this.
And what is the answer to those who would say, listen, at the end of the day, what's involved here involves breaking federal law, and we shouldn't soft pedal that. We shouldn't try to go around it. We shouldn't try to push it to the side. This is something that's important. And I've heard this from people, even in communities where there are virtually no immigrants. It's just something that they feel is important as a principle. What's your answer to that?
I mean, I understand why people have that reaction. However, when, as our organisations all do, when you work with immigrant communities, what you don't see are folks who are coming here with some sort of criminal intent. What you see are hundreds and thousands of people who are here to be with their families, to work hard, to raise their families, to give their children opportunities that they perhaps didn't have in terms of their education, in terms of their job prospects. And the reality is that they are all here. And they have been living peaceably in their communities, working hard, contributing to their communities, in many, many instances paying taxes, really giving more than they're taking in most cases. And so, when we look at that situation, it is not the most helpful response to simply be criminalising and saying, well, it's a matter of federal law. That doesn't actually remedy the issue.
And I would say that the great, great majority of these folks want to get right with the law. They want to be legal. They want to be participating in the mainstream society and be part of the fabric that makes New York so great. And yet, because of congressional inaction, because we have not had legislation in the past 30 years, they have not been able to do so. So I think it's important to understand the overall context before simply just relegating folks to the, to say, oh, you're just all lawbreakers.
Well, one of the consequences of lack of action, lack of clarity about a path to citizenship is you get what are nationally, I understand the number, 16.6 million sort of mixed status families where, somebody's a citizen, somebody's not a citizen, somebody could be deported, somebody might have sort of deferred action, meaning that they're sort of in limbo for the time being. Do you come across folks like that?
Yeah, of course. One of the issues we've been dealing with is the TPS issue, temporary protective status. It was issued by Congress in the 90s, and there's a huge population from Staten Island to the Bronx that are on TPS.
They got the status because of Civil War at the time.
Yeah, Civil War at the time, exactly. And until recently, actually yesterday, that they actually issue out the paper saying, well, we're going to extend TPS for another 2 years. These folks are still in limbo because they're wondering, well, can I invest my time? Can I invest resources to build my businesses in the U.S.? If not, if this is unsure, if I'm not sure if I'm going to be here within the next 2 years or so, what am I doing? There's very little stability. So I think what happens is with this process, and that's where I go back, there's hope that folks are actually saying, well, you know what, maybe the temporary protective status will end. Because I know folks have been under protective status for about 15 years, 20 years. And each year they have to go back and renew it with the uncertainty that, well, this may not get renewed.
Right. Okay, that is going to be the last word. Charles Cooper, thank you for coming in. Marika Dias, very good to see you.
Thank you.
Steve Choi, we'll be talking again real soon. Right now, we're going to take a short break. And coming up, legendary journalist Gay Talese, the author of The Bridge, will be here to talk about the 50th anniversary of the Verrazano Narrows Bridge. Also tonight, the city is devoting millions of dollars to renovate part of the Brooklyn Navy Yard and create manufacturing jobs for local residents. We're going to talk with the man in charge of that development project and discuss what it means for the revitalization of the former shipyard. Stay with us.